Hello, welcome to Small Talk. Welcome to Small Talk. Today's episode might be a little bit longer than normal, but I assure you it'll be worth it. This year, I decided to volunteer at TEDx. My job was to be in the lobby, behind a desk, and as people came in, we'd check their names and give them a name tag before they go into the theater. During a quiet moment, I was looking over at the agenda, checking out the speakers, and then a title caught my eye, Reconciliation Through Music. And I thought, wow, what a great idea for our show. As it happens, the person who delivered that had just finished and entered the lobby. So I approached him, I introduced myself, I asked him if he'd like to be on the show, and he said yes. I asked him for a business card so that I could contact him later. And as I'm going back to my post, I read the name on the card, and it was like, oh, had I known who it was, I might not have been so bold as to approach him. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome the Right Honorable Stephen Point. So, Mr. Point, thank you so much for being here.
Not so sure about the Right Honorable, but certainly the Honorable.
The Honorable. Yeah. I wasn't quite sure. I knew how to say Honorable, but I wasn't quite sure.
The Right Honorable is generally, I think, previous prime ministers. You know.
Oh, okay, but I couldn't say the wrong Honorable. Anyway, for those, unfortunately, that day I didn't get to hear your speech. I heard it later on YouTube once it was posted. But for those people who haven't had a chance to hear about it, can you give us a little synopsis of what it was about?
Sure. When the Reconciliation Commission was established and they proceeded with their work under Judge Sinclair, part of the process was to bring speakers in to hear from people about reconciliation, and also to get those speakers to be witnesses. And in our custom, witnesses are people who listen and give feedback at the end of your process. So I was asked to be a witness, and then I got a letter from Murray asking that the witnesses continue in their work with reconciliation, somehow that they're committed. They're asking them to be committed to do so, and I said, sure, I should be happy to. So I'd already done the canoe project at Parliament Buildings, and that was a reconciliation project. So I'd written the song British Columbia, and I thought, well, why can't this become a reconciliation project? And so using music to bring people together. That's essentially what I want them to do. I wanted the schools to pick up on the song so that the choirs could sing it and the local school band could play it, and that they would be, because of the way the song is set up, required to bring in Aboriginal drummers, native drummers, to participate. So in the end, it would require them to have these two groups come together, right, in the school. And so the first part of the song, of course, is the drumming song. It's a slow beat, and it's the kind of song that you'd use for a canoe. And because in the old days, everybody traveled by canoe, they didn't have highways or anything in those days, people would hear their song coming, and by their song they'd know who they were. So they'd go out onto the beach and welcome them. And when they finished singing that song, the people who were welcoming them would sing their welcome song. And this is just canoe protocol. This is international protocol between tribes. And so I thought, let's use a canoe song, or I wrote a canoe song, and bring in the song on this imaginary canoe, right? And then have the choir and the band brought in, the orchestra brought in on that song, and then have them seating there. And as the drummers fade away and stop drumming, then the orchestra and the choir would sing the actual song, British Columbia, which is kind of like an anthem song or a theme song for British Columbia. And it talks about the Salish Sea, it talks about the land, and it talks about that we're all here and that it's a gift to us, right? And that we should hold it in harmony. And so the song itself speaks for itself, and I gave the song to the people of British Columbia, and I'm hoping that British Columbians sing it, that they begin to use the song as a way of reflecting on our current situation. That is, that we are here, and that's our reality, and we should try to celebrate that as much as try to understand our history, try to make sense of our history, but we should also not forget to celebrate that we're here, and that's a good thing, and that we should try to figure out how we're going to be together, and how we can make life good for our kids, sort of thing. And so this was my project through music to continue on with the theme of reconciliation.
So how do we get people to become more aware of what went on and what is still going on?
Yeah, well, one of the things that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission did was underline the history of residential schools. And for the first time, I think, on a very large scale, people were informed about not only the history of the residential schools, but the legacy left behind after residential schools. And I remember speaking with a lot of people who come and to listen to the speakers and talk to some of the elders that had gone through the system. And this was an amazing experience for them. It was enlightening. The first time they'd heard about it. The other thing that's happening, I think, in British Columbia for the first time is that we're seeing the general education system turn around and begin to create curriculum around the history of Indigenous experience, right? I think that history has largely been, in Canada at least, about the explorers, about the voyageurs, and about the discovery of Canada and that sort of thing. And that's fine and good. But a lot of the history is written from the perspective of those travelers, those people who've come here. And there's not an awful lot written about the Indigenous perspective, what it was that was going on when they seen these people coming, and what happened when they arrived, and the aftermath. The other thing that I see happening in terms of trying to bring a better awareness about information is the universities are also, a lot of them have indigenized, and they're starting their own Indigenous programs, and all of that, of course, is really important. I suppose, you know, when you look at the history, though, and what's happened with Indigenous people, you know, a lot of those people that experienced that went through colonialism at its worst back in the 1800s, went through the 60s scoop and the residential school systems. A lot of those people, unfortunately, already gone. They're already left us, and there's no way of recapturing some of that experience. But it's still, I think, going to be relevant to see more films, for example, being made about the indigenous experience, and perhaps more Indigenous written literature, books and plays about the Indigenous experience. So that one of the things that I think we've had a difficult time as Canadians is trying to find dialogue around which we can construct this history or reconstruct this history from the past in many cases. And a lot of tough words come out, like the word genocide, for example, and this has just been used in a recent report about the murder of missing women. And I think that this kind of dialogue, this kind of interface has to happen so that we can come up with words and dialogue that helps us to gain a better understanding without necessarily if we can avoid it, at least creating more chasms. We can't shrink from the responsibility of gleaning a better understanding of our past, no matter how difficult it might be, no matter how harsh it might be. It is our history, it is what we went through, but we need to, at some point, take that historical page and begin to turn it. We need to begin to turn that page and start another page. In Canada, it's a really young place. I mean, you go to Europe, you go to India, you go to China, these are thousands-year-old cultures.
Right.
And in Canada, in my view, is young enough that we can actually begin to create better stories without shrinking from the responsibility of accepting what historically has happened. But if we begin to turn that page and we begin to tell different stories, you know, and we begin to create a different culture, maybe this melting pot that didn't work in the United States, but this cultural multiculturalism in Canada can begin to weave together to form something different. I think if mankind have got any kind of hope for the future, we've got to learn to let go of the past. We've got to learn to create a better place for ourselves right now, make a different nest that we're sitting in, and bring our children into that nest. Not the one that has the divisive rooms over race, not the ones that have the divisive rooms over religion, you know, the Catholics over here,
yeah.
These guys or sexual identity, all the divisions that human beings have we've built up, and we kind of, I think, flatter ourselves today that we're enlightened and, you know, we're above all of that, and the truth is, you know, that we have a long way to go as people, and part of that is dusting off our wings a little bit and say, let's try to be better people, and let's try to forgive and try to forget and try to move on, without shrinking from the responsibility of actually looking at our history and saying, yep, that's what happened, right? But let's not stay on the rock. Let's move to the next rock,
yeah.
and the next rock that brings us forward as humanity, and always learning from those rocks, because right. We're going to just do it all over again in the next generation if we're not careful.
Yeah, right. I think we're taking another break. Is that what we're doing? Yeah. Okay. So we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
I wanna know all about